Hi, so I'm Hal, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about all the books that I ended up reading in the month of October. I ended up reading 8 books in total, and with those, 3 of those were physical books, 3 of those were ebooks, and 2 of those were audiobooks. In terms of where I got those, 2 books are books that I owned. 1 of those books was from the library and 5 of those books was via Libby. The first book that I ended up reading this month was Watermoon by Samantha Sotto Yambao. This was one of the books that I was reading as an audiobook, and this is like a vaguely fantasy but read a bit more like a contemporary romance book where we follow our main character Hannah, who has grown up in this pawn shop where people come and they bring their regrets, so choices that they regret, things that they would like to change, in like where they buy those from people rather than like buying objects, if that makes sense. So what happens if, like, on the first day of her owning this pawn shop, her father has just gone into retirement, she wakes up, one of these choices have gone missing, they're symbolised as like these beautiful birds in cages, and her father has also gone missing as well, and it looks like there's been a break-in, but she's not quite certain that that's everything that's going on. Someone stumbles upon her shop and decides to help her out, so we follow Hannah and Keishan as they traverse through kind of Hannah's like magical world. They jump through puddles, they get folded in through doorways, things like that, or through all of these places, trying to find out what's going on, what happened to Hannah's father, and if this is all linked to Hannah's mother's disappearance as well. The thing is that this book was did not work for me. I didn't think it was good. I did not have a good time, and I feel like even though a lot of the ideas that were being discussed were kind of interesting, I loved the like vibe to a lot of these places. We are playing with, we're set in Japan, we're playing with kind of ideas linked to Japanese folklore and things like that, as far as I'm aware, and like some of the vibes again are really good. I felt like because it was so like, we go to a place, we find out a little bit of information, we go to another place, we find out a little bit more information. It was really bitty in that way. It didn't flow very well. I did feel as well in the writing style, we were often skipping from, you know, present day, what was going on, skipping back to various characters, getting little stories from their past and things like that. I don't know if this would make more sense in a physical book, but as an audiobook, it didn't really work for me. It was just kind of disjointed, and one of the things that really annoyed me is that one of our characters has a moment where she sees a situation in very black and white thinking. So she has up to this point has been like, oh, these like, you know, my parents are good people, and they've never done anything wrong. I love them, I believe in them, etc. And then she finds out something that her parents have done in her past, and she's like immediately like, they are awful, they are monsters, there is no redeeming them. And I'm like, girl, the nuance. And like, there's not like, that's the main thing. And it's like more understandable if this was a teenager or like a younger person, but like, she's fully an adult. This is her first day of her adult job, you know? She's meant to be like in her 20s, and I'm just like, I don't know if that's me being the like nitpicky person that I am and I have to like break things down, but like, I genuinely just can't understand how you're doing this, and it was really frustrating, and it meant that the plot grinded to like an absolute halt while she was having this like breakdown, but like at the same time, like emotionally wasn't really reflecting on anything that was going on. It was very much like, this is what I'm feeling in this moment, and we're never gonna discuss this again. It was frustrating. I didn't feel like the romance was very interesting or very good. It was very much these two people are in a situation and they think that they're both attractive. They think that the other is attractive, and like, that's all I'm getting here. You could have done an interesting thing with like Keishan being a scientist and like this very magical world, which like the author was trying to do, but I never felt like we actually got into more of the nitty-gritty science stuff. I'm gonna be so honest. I didn't have a great time with this. When I was reading it, I thought it was just okay, and then I read another book in this month which still like wasn't my favorite, but I definitely enjoyed it more, and I was like, oh, this has to go way down. So I ended up giving this 1 star. I don't think it's an awful book. I definitely think that there's room for this author to grow. This is her debut novel. There were definitely bits of this that were interesting. it just didn't work for me. I don't think this is the right genre for me to pick up. I'm not really a contemporary romance reader, and this lent a lot more into those vibes than like the fantastical elements of this book, if that makes sense. The next book that I ended up picking up is a book that I owned, which is Winter's Orbit by Evarina Maxwell. This is a queer sci-fi like romance book. It's a book that I had heard about for a very long time and never been able to get my hands on, and so I ended up buying a physical copy of it. We are following we're like set in a world where we have like an empire with a number of like vassal planets. We're following our main character, Prince Kiem, who is being told that he needs to marry the recent widow of his cousin, Prince Tam, a man called Count Janan. Prince Tam has apparently died in like, well, it's a flybug. It's a flybug accident, which is like a car crash, basically. Count Janan comes from a different one of these vassal planets, and their marriage is required to keep like a peace treaty that is between the Empire and this vassal planet, as well as them being members of a larger treaty throughout the galaxy. So it's pretty important that it all goes through. Count Janan is a very kind of quiet scientist type character, whereas Prince Kiem is like a former like reformed playboy type character. Fantastic setup, I have to say. And yeah, we kind of, things get a bit more complicated. Maybe Tam's accident, you know, that wasn't quite an accident. Maybe there's something else going on. Maybe Jaden's previous marriage with Tam also wasn't as squeaky clean as it seemed. There's a lot of also political intrigue around those treaties that I mentioned. There's romance going on. This was entirely up my alley. I love sci-fi. I love political intrigue in books. I'm gay. I love romances, you know? Is there anything special about this book? Not really. But I did have a good time with it. I think it's very solid. It has all the bones of like an interesting story that I enjoy. Obviously I read this physically, but at the same time I was able to get it as an ebook through my library as well, and the ebook that I had a little short story at the end of it, which was so much fun. Really would recommend that. Elite situation where Kiem talks himself out of a hostage situation by just running his mouth too much, which tells you exactly what the vibe is for the rest of this book, even if that is a detail that's just in that short story. But yeah, I had a really fun time. I gave this a 4 stars. It's not like amazing or anything, but I just had a really fun time, so that's what I'm gonna give it. The next book that I ended up picking up was Malice by Gwynne. I did read this as a physical copy from the library, but I've had to return it because someone else was asking for it. This is the first book in an epic fantasy series, which, at least in this book, we're setting up for like a battle between like the gods of good and evil kind of situation. We follow various characters as alliances are set up and fall apart, and kind of things are happening in this world. We live in a world where I believe the like human characters that lived here did come here from a different place, and there are certain like places where there are giants as well, and there's been this antagonistic relationship between the humans and the giants as far as anyone can remember, an implication about some like magical items formed by the giants, things like that. And we follow kind of various characters. One of the ones that we do spend a lot of time with is Corbin, who is a young kind of boy in the process of becoming a man, and his story is very like training to be kind of good at swords. He ends up adopting a wolf pup, you know, things like that, and being drawn into more of the political intrigue that's going on in this world. It was very funny at times to have like people just going through the worst time of their lives, like battles, fighting these people, etc. Almost losing their lives, losing loved ones, and then we skip to Corbin and he's like, I'm prancing around with my new dog. People don't like me. And I'm like, baby boy, I'm obsessed with you. But yeah, it was really fun. I did spend like the first 100 pages of this going, who are these people? And like struggling a bit with like keeping on top of who everyone is. But like that's, I think, par for the course. Reading an epic fantasy story. Overall had a good time, especially after that point when I was like, okay, I'm situated. I know who these people are. I have an idea about what's going on. I will say, this book with Love and Light, I Am Christian, is deeply Christian. We have a quote from Paradise Lost at the beginning of this world. We get a bit of the mythology of this world and the two kind of main gods. Very Fall of Lucifer-esque vibe to them. And the main thing is that there are angels in this world and they're called the Ben Elohim, which is in fact a Jewish term, which did make me side-eye this entire situation, I'm gonna be so honest. But I think where I'm at the moment is I am interested in the rest of this book series. I know that there's a spin-off book series. I'm less interested in that because of some of the things that I assume are happening in it based on some reviews. Definitely some things that are questionable. I guess, what is an epic fantasy story written by a white man without at least implied Orientalism? Let's be a bit more specific. Had a great time. I did only give this 4 stars. Unfortunately, I do enjoy epic fantasy. I do love Game of Thrones. This is a fact about myself, and I have accepted that. The next book that I ended up reading was An Academy of Liars by Alexis Henderson. This was the other audiobook that I ended up reading this month, and it was another book that I did not super enjoy. This is like a dark academia fantasy book. We're following our main character Lennon, who is like having her engagement party. Lennon is like a college dropout for mental health reasons, and she's found herself in this relationship with this man who is more stable, has a job, and she's basically like, okay, we're gonna get married, I'm going to be a housewife, and that's as much as I can manage. And then she walks into her fiance and her best friend sleeping with each other, and so she's like, I'm like going to go out and leave everything behind, reaches rock bottom in a real way, and receives this call from this mysterious Drayton College where she's been accepted for an interview. She's like, what else do I have to lose? She goes, faces this really weird interview exam, and gets accepted into this school. Where the like vibe is that these are people who are intensely charismatic and have, extending from that, this ability to persuade people, like, through, like, telekinesis almost, like mental persuasion, but some of them can also extend that influence onto, like, the real world and matter and persuade things to change physically. Interesting book. There were definitely like a vibe to this that I really enjoyed. We're set in Savannah. It is doing some interesting things, I will say. I think it's really trying to toe this line between like a world and a school that's very conservative, and that obviously is an interesting thing to do, especially with our main character Lennon being like mixed race black woman in this college in Savannah. But at the same time, it does some things where I feel like it's undercutting itself in trying to, have that image. We basically have like a male dorm and a female dorm, and then there is a mixed gender dorm, but that is for like the top of the class, basically. It's like a special thing that you get initiated to. But there's a comment when these dorms are set up where the author's basically like, but like genderqueer people can like choose whichever dorm that they feel most aligned with, which is, lovely to have, but we don't actually meet any genderqueer characters in this book as far as, I'm aware, so it's a little hollow in that regard. And also, if you're trying to like give this conservative vibe from the fact that you have single gender segregated dorms, it is undercut by the fact that you're like, but trans people. Like, just have it one way or another kind of thing. I know that sounds really unkind, but it's because of the vibe that this book is trying to provide. It's not like I think that you shouldn't make exceptions for trans people. I am transgender. If that makes sense, I don't know. I do think that Lennon is a very interesting character as well. She's this really interesting mix of like having a low self-confidence, but also being like really good at this skill, but not all the time, because her self-confidence is getting in the way of her actually being able to do the thing that she's good at, which is like an interesting thing to examine and explore. But like, boy does it get frustrating sometimes when you're like, I want to shake her. I want to shake her out of her like mental health issues, which I know isn't like going to happen, but like that's the vibe sometimes. Also, the audiobook narrator sometimes does a really annoying voice for her, which did not help the situation. I'm gonna be so honest. The last thing that I wanted to mention as well is that there is a little bit of like a romance situation between Lennon and one of her professors / academic advisors. I think the author does try to have some interesting conversations with that, especially with like Dante's backstory and things like that. I think there's a lot of ways that that could have been a bit more interesting, and I think as well they did sometimes get into the trap of just having circular conversations about the fact that there is a power imbalance and one of them's a teacher and one of them's a student. If you're gonna go for that, at least don't get trapped in the same conversation for so much of this book. Conversation about teacher-student relationships aside. But yeah, in general, like, I think it was interesting. I think the plot was interesting. I definitely felt like we got to an interesting place in the, like, there towards the end of the book. It was a bit slow to get there, but it is a dark academia book. It just was more getting frustrated with some of the characters and some of the situations that they found themselves in. But overall, as much as like I had issues with this book, I felt like it was just okay. This was the book that then made me realise that Waterloo was like bad. And I did not like it, because I'm going to give An Academy for Liars 2 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was To Clutch a Razor by Veronica Roth. This is the other book that I owned that I read this month. And as you can see, this is a little short novella. This is the sequel to When Among Crows, which I think came out last year, where we followed our main character Demeter, who is like grew up in this like holy order of monster hunters in Poland. He ends up going to Chicago to try and find Baba Yaga for like, he wants to make a deal. He wants to find out some information, which we, you know, discover more about in the first novella. And in this one, he is kind of settling into his new life in Chicago. He's got a apartment with a friend. He's got a little bit of a romance going on, and he's learning a bit more about the situation that he finds himself in and some of the tasks that he's now being set out to do, when he also gets the call from his sister that his uncle has died when he was hunting down a monster. And so he kind of ends up going back to Poland. His friends, through various reasons, kind of end up joining him there. And it's kind of like takes place most of this book at that funeral. And with Demeter kind of having to sit in this place and realize that you have changed and your family hasn't, and maybe that means that they're not good people anymore, and what does that mean for your relationship with them, for how you can spend time with them, things like that. I think that was a really interesting part of this story. It's also got some action, we learn a lot more about the Holy Order as well, which I thought was really interesting, about these knights. As much as they're like not good, like I think some of the lore and stuff is very interesting. We're playing a lot with Polish folklore, but also how that interacts with other, you know, folklore creatures, other descriptions of like similar ideas. The relationship in this book were all really good. I think that is something that Veronica Roth does a good job of writing. I really enjoyed this. I think I definitely did enjoy this more than the first one. I ended up giving this 4 stars. Yeah, it was a great time. I also just love these covers. There's a reason why I own these physically, and it's not just because I think the story's really good, but like, I think they're gorgeous. The next book that I ended up picking up was The Starving Saints by Caitlin Starling. This is a horror novel that's set in like a medieval city castle. I was definitely like vibing with like, you know, like medieval walled cities. I grew up in Chester. There's a definite vibe of that going on here. That's been under siege by an enemy kingdom. They're running low on food. A miracle came to give them water. And so yeah, we're following Phosphine, who is like an heretical ex-nun. She worked out how to treat the contaminated water in their well so that they have a water supply. She's been tasked by the king to find a way to be able to generate them food. We have Gwynne, a knight, who like would just like to not be here. She would like to be on a battlefield again and following orders and not having to think for herself in a real way. And she gets tasked to supervise Phosphine and check that she's actually working on her task. And as well, we follow Trailer, who is a young girl who came to the city for kind of vengeance against Gwynne, and maybe now when she's realizing things are going bad, desperately wants to get out of there. So what happens when all of these 3 characters start to, you know, interact and their lives get entangled, but also the saints that they worship come to their city and bring lots and lots of fresh food and fresh meat. Where is this from? Don't worry about it. And things get a lot weirder and a lot more complicated from there. I really enjoyed this. I thought that the like religious horror vibes were excellent. I love that. I thought that the medieval setting was really, really fun. And I felt like the relationships between these three characters were incredibly compelling. There was just this like little element of toxicity that was present like in these relationships, which just made them like incredibly compelling and like interesting, and something that I really felt like sinking my teeth into in a real way. Like, I think this whole book, I was just like, ooh, this is so good, this is so juicy. And yeah, I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And whilst it didn't give me that like giggling, kicking my feet feeling that a lot of my 5-star reads do give me, I thought it was just so good. So I did end up giving this 5 stars. It's really interesting because I have read I read a little novella by Starling. I read Yellow Jessamine because I'd heard about I heard the synopsis for The Starving Saints when it was like pre-release, and I thought it was interesting, but I'd never read anything by her before, and I was like, oh, I should check out something different to see if this is my vibe. And I felt like Yellow Jessamine was just like kind of okay. I ended up giving it 2 stars. So I was a little bit trepidatious going into this book because I'd not had a great experience with this author before. But this like blew me out of the water. I'm definitely interested in reading more of her work going forward. And I also would like to say to anyone who is emotional, the afterword of this book fucking got me in a real way. I did not cry through this novel, and then like the 3.5 pages or whatever of the afterword, tears from my face. The next book that I ended up reading was The Starving Saints by Kingfisher. This is the 3rd novella set in the Sworn Soldier series, which follow our kind of main character Alice Easton, the Sworn Soldier that these are kind of referring to, as he is tasked to, investigate various spooky things that are going on. In this one, he gets called to go to America by his friend Dr. Deaton, who we met in the first book in this series, the kind of the House of Usher one, as well as like his like loyal manservant character. I don't know what Arthur would be described as, but the two of them from, this made-up imaginary European town going to America because Dr. Deaton's cousin recently bought an abandoned coal mine in West Virginia and went down it, wrote some letters about the things that he was finding there. There was a weird red glow sometimes coming from the mine. He found this really weird tunnel that led to this like pearlescent chamber, and now he's gone missing. So they kind of trek out to this mine with Dr. Deaton and one of Dr. Deaton's companions, and try and kind of investigate what's going on. A lot of going into mine shafts, so like a lot of like Easton being very claustrophobic about stuff. But yeah, I thought that this was really good. I felt like there were horror parts of this book that were genuinely really creepy and horrifying, and there were like heartwarming portions of this book which were really good and kind of, heartwarming, and that more like cozy, comfy cozy thing that T. Kingfisher sometimes does with her books. As much as I've like had issues with the other 2 books in this series, I felt like this one like really hit the mark in what I was looking for, and I had a really good time with it. Easton was on like top form of, they simply do not care for the supernatural, caves, or 3, gossip about the people they're with. And you're just there like, I want to know what's going on, and Alex like, I simply did not care. Dr. Deaton was having a relationship, I do not care. I'm not telling you about that. Which is such a great power move. Overall, I gave this 4 stars. I had a fun time with this little novella, very short, great read. The next book that I ended up reading as well, another little novella. I really just like hit my way through like 3 novellas in short succession. This was not on purpose. I just like, they were available from my library. I was interested in reading them. Was Among the Burning Flowers by Samantha Shannon. This is set in her like Roots of Chaos, Priory of the Orange Tree world. It's a prequel to, it's set before the events of Priory, where we're following the fall of Iskalin to the like draconic Wyvern forces. We are following a couple of different perspectives. One of our main one is Marosa, who is the princess of Iskalin. She has been kept inside this castle her entire life by her father, and she's like waiting for the day where her betrothal to Obrek in the like Mentendon is gonna let her like leave this place and hopefully like change the world for better. And then obviously they get attacked by, you know, the dragons happen and it's bad. So she's very much like trying to do her best in this very like uncomfortable and bad situation that she's found herself in, where this house arrest gets even worse, if you can believe it. We also then follow Albrecht in kind of more the second half of this book, where he's dealing with the politics of his own kingdom as well as the wider world. We get a bit more of like how other places are responding to it. And we also follow Estina Milagro, who has grown up kind of quite poor. She is making her living killing like draconic like wormlings, and how her world changes when the wyverns kind of attack and things like that. This was really good. I do think this was funny because it's like 288 pages, which is like long for a novella, but it is a novella. It is just this one short story. I think it was really interesting in filling in more of the history and like information about this world. I do really enjoy Samantha Shannon's writing, especially in this world. This is the only thing of hers that I've read, and I had a good time with that. I do think it is just like a little story to give you a little bit more information about this world, and it's not a huge amount more than that, but like it does what it sets out to do, and I think it was fun. So yeah, I ended up giving this 3 stars as well. So, you know, ignoring the rocky start with those audiobooks, I think I had a really good time in terms of my reading this month. In terms of kind of things that I'm picking up, interested in kind of this upcoming month in November, I am currently reading Reborn by Seth Haddon and having a great time with that. I'm also picked up The Red Scholar's Wake by Aliette de Bedard, I believe. I've read some other books kind of, I think as well, that so far this month I am on my seconds of audiobooks and ebooks, and I've got some interesting books kind of coming up as well that I'm excited for. That's kind of everything that I've read this past month. It was, like I mentioned, 8 books. I think I'm doing pretty well at the moment. I don't know if I'm going to reach my reading goal, but we can always hope. I don't care that much about it. I will just put it down. I hope that you are having a nice day, that you're reading some nice things as well. Bye!